Welcome, everyone, to Counterpoint Apologetics. And tonight we are having a review of Michael Burgos' book. And tonight we'll be covering chapter 3. The previous video that we did covered chapters 1 and 2. And tonight we are going to cover chapters 3 and primarily Colossians. I want to welcome my guests. Follow the Cloud and Elder Brandon Nero. Welcome, everyone.
Hey. Glad to be back one more time.
Yes, sir. Good to be here.
And we really wanted to get into this chapter, and because this chapter is extremely important. And I think my brother Nero and Tim really, they really love getting into this book. And there's going to be a lot to cover because Colossians 1, Hebrews 1, and John 1 are primary argument texts that Trinitarians use to prove the preexistence of the eternal Son. And tonight, basically, we'll probably only be able to cover Colossians 1 because it's so deep. Hebrews will probably be the same way. So we will break up chapter 3 into segments. And so we'll go from there and see how far we get tonight. Introduce yourself, Tim, and on your channel and your thoughts on Colossians 1.
Yeah, so my channel is Follow the Cloud. It kind of named after a project I did when I was in college for theology. And basically, it's just when you see in the Old Testament, the cloud by day and the fire by night, it was an external presence of God that the Jews were supposed to follow that. And likewise, in the New Covenant, when we have life in the Spirit, we are to follow the cloud, which is also internal to us. And so that's why I call my channel Follow the Cloud. It's meant to be primarily more scholarly and less about purely apologetics. I try to make videos here and there. I don't do weekly content because I feel like trying to focus on making good content rather than just making daily or weekly content. So that's part of the reason why it kind of has a slower process there. But it's also called Follow the Cloud on YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook and Instagram actually. And I'm glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Tim's a great individual and a good Christian, and I always appreciate his insights and everything that he does. Brother Nero, welcome, brother. I hope you're doing well, and give us your thoughts and about your channel, obviously, and make sure everyone follows it because we are going to cross this across channels. This isn't limited to this channel. It goes to every channel that wants to use it. So that's the reason why we want to do a deep book review. This is for everyone and anyone.
Awesome. Well, hey, glad to be here again. My name's Brandon or Elder Nero, depending on which segment I'm ministering to. And I am excited because this is a great apologetic work to really take some time to kind of depict to see if some of the claims that are being made are really strong against Oneness Pentecostals. But I am going to introduce my channel, which is 238 Media. 238, maybe you've noticed the rhyme at Acts 238, because at the end of the day, after doing apologetics, it is my intention that I want all men to be saved. And if there is an invitation for the gospel, it isn't not doing my job. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm very excited to get into this, especially dealing with the major themes that are introduced to it. And this is going to be a good episode.
Absolutely. And Brother Nero, I truly appreciate your ministry. Both links will be in the video. And so always please follow their channel. These are great men of God, and I truly appreciate everything they do. High quality individuals, and without a doubt. So basically what we're going to do, we'll start with Burgos's text. We will go through his arguments on Colossians 1 and start from the text itself. I'll bring up the text real quick. Here we go. Now, here's what the exact paragraph of Burgos. He says, the antecedent of the above pericope is the Father's beloved Son, verses 12 and 13. The statement that the Son is the image of the invisible God and the firstborn of all creation is contextualized by means of the Son's active role in creating all things. If one would just suppose that the appellations image and firstborn are exclusive to the Son, then one is forced to affirm the Son's active role in creating all things. The language of image and firstborn is given an explanation by Paul himself. So the Son is the image of the invisible God and the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created. Thus, any affirmation of the Son as image and firstborn demands affirmation of the Son as the one who made all things. Moreover, all things were created through the Son and for the Son. Now, notice here, Burgos does not give any leeway to any other interpretation. Notice the key words he uses: demands. It doesn't give any other possibilities to the text. And basically, when you look at what he just said, there's multiple problems with it. He really hasn't, and of course, we'll go down through the other proof points that he has. But you're going to find out very quickly he supposes way too much. I mean, there's high amounts of presuppositions without actually proving the case. Anything that Tim that you wanted to bring up, or Brother Nero?
Yeah. So, like what you said, there is some presuppositions going on there, and I think what really cracks me up is the metaphysical assumptions about what, since Jesus was the agent in creation. He's like you said, there's this language that demands. It's the only meaning that can happen, and we'll talk about it a little bit more because it's towards the end of his section on Colossians. But even the word "in," calling Bernard disingenuous for saying that doesn't literally mean in. Well, in most cases it does, and you have to conceptually presuppose a certain metaphysics that Jesus was physically there in creation, instead of this idea, and I think it's a much more in steep with the historical perspective of like Paul, like more steep with, when I say historical perspective, Paul within his historical context and his social context, with the nature of wisdom Christology, wisdom literature, and how Jesus is the embodiment of God's wisdom, of God's power, and all that. So when I look at there's always a third option, and Burgos leaves no room for that third option. Instead, he tries to put it into this either or fallacy.
I would agree. Brother Nero?
Yeah, and one of the things that really jumped off to me as, reading it, especially in the beginning of the chapter going into it, he's and I appreciate this. He is connecting it with the previous thought with Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 8 and 6. So I appreciate at least some semblance of a continuance of thought with the context. But one of the things that really jumps out to me is, as you guys have already so rightly recognized, it is a presupposition that this mentioning, especially when we get down into the grammar, that this agency must be a literal real agency. There is no introductory considerations of just the historical context of Colossians. Because when doing that and considering that, as one scholar said, that the thing that the Colossian heretics had in common with the saints in Colossae is the fact that they both shared the same wisdom, literature presuppositions. I think, especially in the context of an apologetic work, Colossians is somewhat apologetic within itself. And not to even go into that, I think lends itself to a lot of functional problems. But as you mentioned, like the icon or the image, or the prototokos, firstborn of all creation, these words, and to be honest, my critique with verse 15, with a lot of his work, is not so much the grammar. It's the historical literary context from which is just absent from consideration. And to me, and I think I said this last time, grammar can only tell you what was said, but it takes all of these little things called context to tell you what it's meant, and to divorce it from its wisdom background, which, notice alert, I am a big fan of that, not because it's a response, but it's just scholastically true. But I think, as you said, the presuppositions that this because it's obviously dealing with creation. And I understand why it is a valuable text to use for that. But there's going to be a lot of things we have to reconcile, especially considering that this is a hymn, which gives a lot of flexibility of meaning that, of course, when we're looking back through all of these years of councils and creeds, it can look that way. But the question is that what the original audience would have understood the conversation to be around, especially considering the major context of it is in a prepositional, metaphysical, cosmological context, as Krugel says. Say that real fast, get the Holy Ghost. That these things to me, it's so apologetic, it's not scholastic in that area, and I say that respectfully.
Yep, and this is one of the things that, unlike Burgos, one of the things that you're going to see tonight, obviously, is I will never say that something cannot be X view, right? I believe everything has potential on a spectrum of possibility of interpretation. Brother Nero is very much into wisdom Christology, as so is Paul the Cloud, and I love wisdom Christology as well. Brother Bernard and some of the other people that Burgos mentions, they come from a different point of view. Now, one of the key things that you have to understand is no matter which of these views that we present, all of them have the potentiality to be true, no matter what Burgos says. Because ultimately, you have to say that all things were made within view of Christ, because Christ is the paradigm of creation, the image, that the eternal reality of how God in the paradigm scope of all things, right? So Christ was a central figure in the point of creation anyway, that he was foreordained, before the foundation, we were foreordained before the foundation of the world, or other terminology that the how we were in Christ and all these things. So God's not just throwing it against the wall and see if it sticks. No, God's wisdom is that which was, is, and will be. His plan and his wisdom are complete in themselves. So when we sit there and say, oh, this can't be true, well, that may not be what Paul is specifically referencing, but the truths are still there. My focus is what I call kingdom Christology. Kingdom Christology is what I'm going to get into. Mine is a variation of aspects of wisdom Christology and the focus of the paradigm of Christ as the resurrected and Lord that is given all power in heaven and earth. So my focus is on a new creation in the kingdom of the Son. And that also involves wisdom, where Brother Nero may focus more on aspects of wisdom literature that are also true in perspective of even what I say. They do not negate each other. Actually, they work hand in hand because both of them can be true at the same time. That's what some people, it seems like they have a problem with very variable facts and relations to something that's being said. So what I wanted to bring up real quick is this right here. There's a standard that Burgos must meet in this text. No matter which variation of oneness view how you view Colossians 1, he still has to meet a contextual and grammatical position that is self-sustaining, not just simply presuppositions for his position to say, oh, it's just true. Well, guess what? He doesn't meet any of those categories. And the reason why is Paul ultimately doesn't allow him to. So before we walk through the paragraph, here's what the reader should know the standard. Burgos does not merely need to win a verse. He needs to win at every level of Paul's argument. If he fails at any level, his reading cannot control the passage. This is extremely important. There's different levels to this, and this is what I want to get into. Verses 16 and 17, what Burgos must prove at this level, the powers list equals governance terms. That's what the text says. Grammar allows multiple readings. Paragraph, verses 12 through 20. There is a redemption frame plus cross climax governs the hymn. So when you look at the context of the paragraph, you have redemption frame and they have the climax of the cross. The chapter 1 and 2, Colossians 2:10 and 15, same powers are defeated at the cross. So now you have context to what Paul is speaking of. Now you have the letter. Mystery is Christ in you, the Gentiles, not eternal Son, disclosure. Paul never brings up the mystery is an eternal Son. The mystery is the glory of Christ. Christ in you. The whole Paul's corpus is flexible when it comes to the use katizo. And the powers plus resurrection plus cross lock this domain. It doesn't matter where you go in the arguments, that one word locks how this structure fits in Paul. Tim, did you want to make any comments or anything on on context?
Yeah, and again, and this is where we get down to BURGOS's methodology. He claims to be on the grammatical historical method. He claims that his method, but it sure seems like he is minoring in the historical context. And again, when you're looking at the immediate context, it's not enough to retroject one's metaphysics into the idea and say it must mean this. This is the only meaning, but they actually go through the different possible meanings of it, and then through that, by weighing the options, seeing which one best fits not only with the grammar but with the historical grounding or the historical context behind the text. And I do think that he does do a fair chance at trying to understand the grammar, and he provides a possible reading through the grammar, but he makes it sound like this is the only reading instead of understanding the flexibility of some aspects of the grammar and in what ways they can mean, and essentially through a possible reading through grammar robs it of its historical context. And I just think that's what he does. And if you notice, I really don't see in his book him ever actually dealing with historical context. I'm glad that he tries to deal with the grammar, but there is not much being dealt with when it comes to what does Paul actually mean by the phrase, except for here's a possible rendering from the grammar, but in his language, it must mean this from the grammar. Instead, like for instance, agency. He uses the concept of agency through the grammar, but he doesn't look at it in its historical context of wisdom as the agent. And so, and the likes, and you just see that consistently throughout the book. But anyways, I'll stop there for now and give it to Brother Nero to kind of provide his thoughts.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, because you almost kind of pivoted into some of my thoughts, and there's an article by a gentleman by the name of Kugler, enjoying some of his thinking, but I think one of the things that he brings up when discussing Colossians, because it is a part of his research, that he establishes a few points that I think are going to be really important to dealing not only with Colossians, Hebrews, John, 1 Corinthians, because all of them use the same cosmological language. One point that he builds upon is that ancient cosmological language was, one, rhetorically flexible. So from one standpoint, we can't be so wooded in our thinking as being Western Middle Platonic Stoic influenced modernists. Casual expressions were not metaphysical blueprints. And so many times, especially dealing with these works in the New Testament that seems to use constructions that would lend itself to metaphysical complexity, we have to be careful that we are not assuming a metaphysical framework that would not have been native to the thinker or the author or even the audience. Because if Paul is writing this to a group of people who has something shared in common, what would they have thought? Because one thing has to be consistent within your hermeneutic. It cannot mean more to you than it meant to the people that it was written to. Kugler goes on to say that the philosophical and Jewish traditions use similar formulas, and both participates in the broader idiom. And I think sometimes just going into this, automatically assuming that we have a metaphysical framework that shows that he must have been thinking in these terms, it misses not only, I think, the richness of the Jewish heritage from which this literature comes from, but it also kind of maybe skews it in hopes of something else. And I want to quote one thing that he said, quote, Ancient cosmological discourse frequently employed casual and representational language in ways that were fluid and contextually determined rather than rigidly metaphysical. Now, I think especially when you see things like Dr. Burgos makes a point about image, that this must be evidence of ontological distinction in creation. Hold on a minute. Wait a minute. Maybe that means that to you, but what's the evidence using a healthy historical critical grammatical method that this is what was going on in their mind? And I just don't think contextually one can prove that without over inserting Aristotelian metaphysical framework.
Yeah, I agree. He supposes a lot. Obviously, in some of the terminology that he uses later, talking about the wisdom, the logos, and he just presupposes so many metaphysical realities that the text that somehow Paul just references, and that's problematic. On this, I wanted to get into real quick on my point. Colossians 1 through 12 through 20 presents a total Christology. Because even, and here's the thing, no matter if you're oneness, Trinitarian, or Unitarian, you have to believe that everything I'm about to posit is true. Again, doesn't matter whether that's what you believe Paul's not talking about that. That's fine. But you still have to agree that it's true. I hope everyone understands that. This is a very important point. You just can't simply just negate it. You have to prove how it is not that was what Paul is talking about. Because if it's still true in structure and order and governance of Paul's view of the kingdom, then that's an argument that it is true. You just can't just throw it to the side and say, this text demands. Well, you're going to have to give qualifiers and markers of why it's true. Burgos never does it in anywhere in this text, in his arguments. So, and my position is Colossians 1, 12 through 20 presents a total Christology. The man Christ Jesus, as risen and glorified and reigning center of God's eternal purpose. The controlling frame is, in my view, is not Genesis creation, right? Because if this is about kingdom Christology, we're moving back a little bit. Now, it doesn't negate that Christ is the paradigm of creation and the wisdom of God that is realized, right? So, but messianic enthronement, bestowed reign, and ordering all things under the risen Christ. The frame is redemptive. Verses 12 through 14 define the Son through inheritance, rescue, kingdom transfer, redemption, and forgiveness before the hymn even begins. The domain is governance. Verses 16 specifies thrones, dominions, rulers, and authorities, the language of rank, jurisdiction, and administration. That's technically not Genesis scenery. The axis of the resurrection is verses 18. It defines primacy through firstborn from the dead and headship over the body of the church. And of course, the climax is the cross in 19 through 20, drive the hymn to reconciliation through the blood of Christ. Now, earlier, Paul Burgos brings up 1 Corinthians 8:6 on our previous video and in his book, right? The problem is that when he demands that is about being Yahweh, there's a lot of problems with that. Instead of understanding as an economic aspect of creation, that God's intent is to bring forth a true Messiah, by which in his order of creation, there is kingship, authorities, rulers, and powers. So the Father is the source, Christ is the means and the goal. Paul's pattern keeps the Father as source and Christ as the mediated Lord, the sphere and appointed goal of the ordered cosmos, not a second ultimate source. So this reading is not smaller for Burgos, it is fuller. And we'll get into that here in a minute, because in my view, if you jump from the context of verses 12 through 14, and then you jump to outside the context of the kingdom to jump to 18 and on, you've basically eliminated probably the most complete reference and articulation in the whole New Testament of the reign and authority of the risen Lord, who has been made what? Over all creation, the one who has power over all things. Matthew 28:18. That he has that power in heaven and earth. Philippians 2. For God has highly exalted him and given him a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, the things in heaven, the things in earth, and things under the earth. To whose glory? The Father's, not them, not somebody else. It's the Father's glory. So if that's true, then the Father is the source of this glory. Christ is the means of the Father's glory. It's his intent to redeem. And you can't say something is intrinsic if all power in heaven and earth is given unto me, Matthew 28:18. This is an intrinsic authority and power. This is not about being Yahweh. It's about order and domain in the wisdom of God in creation. And that is extremely important to understand. Because if someone has been given all power in heaven and earth, what is that legal authority being called? That's a Lord, folks. That's a diminutive label and title of authority that is given. That's who Jesus Christ is. He is the power of over heaven, the earth, and under the earth. And all shall bow before him. Tim and Brother Nero?
Yeah, and this kind of leads to the idea, and particularly Burgos's critiques of Bernard's commentary on Colossians here. And so Bernard, overall, it seems like he's making 4 points as to why in Colossians it's referring to like the incarnation. There are 4 references. And first, Bernard talks about how you basically have, when it's referring to the Son, you see it referring to the context. It is referring to Jesus. He's a referent, but it's obviously referring to the incarnation. And the term Son is inherently referring to the incarnation. And then that's the second point. And then the third point is actually I'm losing the third point, but I know the 4 point. At least the 4 point basically is that Jesus, and this is citing the end of the hymn, is the fullness of God, of the Father incarnate, not necessarily the fullness of just the like more abstract divine essence incarnate. So he's not just one person of the Trinity. But this is Bernard again. I'm not trying to make a claim to Colossians right now. I'm just setting up the thing. Well, it's very interesting to me. Burgos sets it up to critique by discrediting Bernard, saying that it's all based off of assumption, retrojecting his own ideology. Now, for points 2 and 3, from what I understand, this can be very true if Burgos rightly represented Bernard on point 1. Burgos says that Bernard retrojected the Jesus as referring to the incarnation alone, but he says, and Burgos says in page, I think it's page 35, that or I think it's page 35, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check here. Yes, and page 35, that Bernard does this, but he's assuming it in point 1 because he doesn't cite any immediate context to provide or substantiate his claim. That is what Burgos says. Well, folks, I do have Bernard's commentary on Colossians, and Bernard actually does cite a verse. He cites Colossians chapter 1, verse 19. And I would even add, and I think Bernard should have also cited verse 20, but if you read it real quick, it says, because he was well pleased for the fullness, and this referring to Jesus, for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself by making peace through the blood of his cross, through him, whether things on earth or in heaven. So this seems like there's at least an incarnational value involved when referencing to Christ. And I think here, if Burgos has a different understanding of that passage and saying that Jesus is only, like, part of him is the incarnation. He wasn't always the incarnated one. The incarnation is just missional to him. Maybe he could try to make such a claim. But the problem is that I have with Burgos's book is that he doesn't only omits Bernard making this claim or referencing the verse. Burgos says, and I'll just quote it real quick, actually, because I think this is what's really interesting to me. Is he says first, Bernard stated the context reveals that the subject of the discussion is the incarnation, although he cites no contextual basis for this assertion. Given the immediate context, cites the Son's agency in creation as a reason for his identification as image. There is not any reason to tie image to the incarnation. So that's Burgos right there. Well, it's not just omitting that Bernard used the verse, Colossians 1:19. He actually goes out of his way to say that Bernard provides no contextual basis, no immediate contextual basis. So I'm sitting here wondering, did he have like an old edition maybe of Bernard? I don't know. I mean, this book, I mean, this edition's been out for a hot minute. 1990, and it was a reprint in 2015. It doesn't seem like a revision; it was just a reprint. Whereas you have Burgos's book here, in this particular model or brand per se. Yeah, third edition, 2020. So I'm left wondering if Bernard's publication of his most recent print that I have here, 2015, this recent reprint or revision is 2020. Why did he not only omit, but he also again went out of his way and said that Bernard did not? He said it head on, and that's kind of where I wonder, like, where is he coming with this? Why did he do that? And any thoughts, Brother Nero?
Yeah, I guess maybe it's just me trying to be as diplomatic. Maybe I won't assume it was an oversight or a mistake, but it definitely is not consistent with the quality of critique that we've seen in this book thus far. So that is a very interesting oversight, that assuming in good confidence that perhaps if he notices it, he'll be a correction on the next edition. But especially one thing you said earlier was as it related to image or the icon on page 34, the statement that the Son is the image of the invisible God and firstborn of all creation is contextualized by means of the Son's active role in creating all things. And again, and I know there is some differences of opinion of approach to the cosmological thought of it, but again, and I guess this is where I would say being critical of the genre's usage is important, because this is another example of the word of wisdom being borrowed and used when it says he's the image or the icon of the invisible God. And image within wisdom literature functions as a revelatory method, not an ontological multiplication. These are just more examples of the metaphysical fluidity that they had at their disposal when expressing the interaction of the divine. And some would say, well, no, this is progressive revelation. Well, you're going to have to prove that they had a different understanding that was contextually available to them. And also just another point that was brought up earlier, especially as it related to the through whom, for him language and things like that was used. A good thing that I think has to be considered is Romans 11:36, where it uses unmistakably the same language. And this is the part I would say has to be considered. If we're going to have in one context these words being very strict rules governing ontological position and operation, we have to be consistent within the text. Now, Romans is written by the same author, which is the Apostle Paul. But he says in Romans 11:36, for from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. The Greek is oti ek atu, kai di atu, kai ais auton, tapanta, atu, he, doxa ais, tos, aeonios, amen. Now, you may say, what's the big deal? You people from Alabama love just to make big deals about everything. Well, the issue is this. The for from him is the cause, which this is more of that the middle Platonic Stoic language that we see the wisdom genre using gingerly to emphasize a point to the Alexandrian Jews. I'm not suggesting they're borrowing their metaphysical framework, but just based on how they use it, the from him causal, through him, the means by which, and to him. Now, this is a problem because that verse is addressing the Father. So now we have a potential conflation of operations because, and I get it, all activities out extra of the divine essence. But when you have the doctrine of inseparable operations, that's something to consider. But I would say, well, why is the through him the Father in Romans, but the through him is the Son in Colossians? Don't you think the Apostle Paul, who wrote both of them, would have been aware of that?
Exactly right.
Yes, it's a him.
And that goes to, and that's a point I get into later. That's a very powerful point, because the reality is you can have two throughs and they be totally different references to two different things. You can have creation and you can have redemption.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need two throughs for creation. I can have a through for creation and a through for redemption. Because the point and reason for the incarnation. God needed to redeem mankind. The means of redemption and the eternal kingdom is through Jesus Christ. And when we go to one of the favorite verses that all Oneness Pentecostals know, Isaiah 9:6. When you actually start studying Isaiah 9:6, that is all about kingdom Christology. Christ is the gateway to the eternal kingdom. He literally fathers eternity through him, because without him, there is no future for us in the sense of having a relationship with God in a positive sense. So unless you believe in annihilationism or something like that. But beyond that, the whole aspect of Isaiah 9:6 is about how the means of eternity and the relationship when all things are created new and the Christ delivers up the kingdom to the Father. One of the things I was going to bring up here is real quick is this right here. The main, what I call Burgos' main moves here in his first paragraph is he wants to make image plus firstborn contextualized by creating all things. Otherwise, he hinges image and firstborn by pointing out created all things. He backfeeds it. He doesn't read image as incarnation or firstborn as an aspect of economy in the redemptive aspects and the kingdom aspects. He reads back created, so he hinges everything of his interpretation on katizo. So as Brother Nero and Tim brought up, for by him all things were created, through him and for him. My argument is you have to contextualize according to the text. You have to prove contextually what this is. First off, we started in this is where we get into what we call the frame control. The control of and when we view controlling the lens of kingdom Christology, God appointed the Messiah receives reign, lordship, and redemptive dominion in creation. That attacks and proceeds in this order. I brought this up 12 through 14. The Son is already defined as an inheritor, rescuer, kingdom, redemptive, forgiveness of sins. So Burgos must prove to reset to Genesis from the previous context. So if we do believe it is Genesis, and as I said, I don't negate anything, but we have to prove it in the context. Step 2, you have to attack create all things as Burgos' real engine. As I point up, Burgos is focus point. What drives the terminology and the definition of image and firstborn is creation. And that's how he argues it. This is his primacy argument, not image, not firstborn, but created all things. We break this first by showing the kingdom, reign, subjection, text chain, and the powers list. And when you go through this, you expose the metaphysical demands Burgos never cashes out. He never does it. And of course, in step 4, we will show how image, firstborn, and prepositions fit the kingdom reading, not Burgos' reading. Tim or Brother Nero, did y'all want to bring up anything?
I think you got it there right now. I don't think I have anything to add to that, but we'll continue on as we get into more details, because now we're getting like an overview of it, but the more details, the finer details of each verse and each sentence.
Yep.
I'll stop because the more we look at it, I just keep seeing things that pop out. Even that the Greek tapanta there.
Yep.
Guess what? It had a life before we found it in Colossians.
Yeah, exactly right, brother. Mm-hmm.
That has to be brought in consideration, even in the wisdom context of them speaking through, as I said gingerly before, that middle Platonic Stoic lens to those Alexandrian Jews. That phrase tapanta, and I always say, even my Greek sounds Southern. It has a wide range of meaning, and even, let's say if we're being as flexible as we can, let's say if we granted that this was talking about creation, you still have to establish metaphysically what he meant by that. And that is it. I think even if we give every presupposition, there's still a great gulf between the actual historical grammatical context that needs to be established.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what I'm saying. It's one thing to simply say, this is how my view is. It's another thing to be dogmatic. it's two different things. And that's the problem. BURGOS front loads create all thing and ignores any potentiality of kingdom Christology. And this is what you'll notice in all Trinitarian doctrine. Trinitarians have to do what you call the copy and paste. Everything that you would realize toward what we call incarnation, he's the image of the invisible God, the exact representation, whatever you want to say, whatever terminology I and my Father one, they automatically, instead of just leaving it at the incarnation and what the quality of incarnation is, they play copy and paste. Well, this is talking about the divine ontology. So basically, we don't have the ad intra reality just being spoken of. We also have the incarnational reality spoken of in Trinitarian land. Well, this is what they do also in Colossians and Paul's writings. Everything that would be about the kingdom and what Paul's focus is about how we've been created in Christ for good works, how we notice there created in Christ for good works, and other terminology. You go to Ephesians 1, you go to Colossians 1, Romans 11:36 that Brother Neer brought up. You use this terminology all throughout Paul. Guess what? It has nothing to do with God being revisioned. It has to do with about God and his intent to redeem. It's kingdom of the Son. That's literally what Colossians 1 brings up. I'm going to go there real quick so we can read this so everyone understands. Here's the full text. Verse 12, giving thanks to the Father. Notice there, does it say the Trinity? No. Who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has rescued us from the power of darkness. He has rescued us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. This is clearly contextually not about ad intra values. In whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So the context right now is strictly about the kingdom, the incarnation, the glorification. Has anything changed here when it says he is the image of the invisible God? No. Where are you going to import at this point in time eternal persons into the context? I'm going to wait for the clarifier and the marker.
Yeah.
It's not there.
And Chris, if I can just add, if you notice that the comparison here, where you have in verse 15 the firstborn of all creation, but then you have in verse 18 the firstborn from the dead. What is he referring? Because they just think it means preeminence, but there is an actual reality to firstborn here, and it's not beyond the scope of imagination to relate as Jesus being the full embodiment of wisdom, just as wisdom in wisdom literature was the firstborn uh, into creation as God's order, God's divine interactions with creation, right? God manifesting His presence into creation as the creative order. But Jesus being the full embodiment of that creative power is the firstborn of all new creation, is the firstborn from the dead. And like you said, does the context just completely change? Does it magically change because you have read for verses 15 through 17 and 18 through 20? It's just talking about completely different aspects, completely different from the kingdom of God, completely different context? Or is it all, as the hymn usually is, not giving a complete timeline, but is creating a picture of how the kingdom of God functions through Jesus Christ, how new creation functions through the life, death, and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
But
do you want to add anything, Brother Nero?
No, I think that was spot on. Spot on.
So verse 15, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. As Tim brought up, his whole thing is firstborn must mean X, right? Well, we have no problem with preeminence because the natural meaning of the order is still preeminent. It doesn't, that word can be used, right? Protokos can be used for just simply preeminence, right? But the normal reading also means order of line. Like a firstborn child has preeminence because of his birth. Yes, you can use it one way, but Paul, according to this context, clearly tells you the use of prototokos. He tells you. It doesn't fit just simply going preeminence. We agree with preeminence, but that's very 2D of a 3D point. He is the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. The question is what is this contextually tied to? Does simply using the word created mean Genesis? No, it doesn't. Matter of fact, when we get into the numbers of Paul's usage, guess how many times that word supports BURGOS's rendering? The answer is 0. Paul doesn't use the word that way. Not toward Jesus Christ. Because this is the text of dispute, right? So if this is the text of dispute, we have to look at the other uses of Paul, the other aspects of the economy of how Paul uses reference to Jesus Christ and these key phrases. For in him, and say, oh, that means by. We had no problem with that by him were things created or through him, in the sense of because of the death, burial, and resurrection and his glorifications, by his act, he brings forth the reality of the kingdom. So through and by him is true. And it is also for him in the wisdom of God. We have no problem with those things at all. Because Christ is the embodiment of that which was, is, and will be. He is the perfection of that. That's why it's the Father's glory. It's his glory and his wisdom alone. You go to Ephesians 1, it clearly teaches this. And guess what? There is no Genesis. There is no acts of creation. You have to prove from the text in Paul's writings where you get this, instead of putting a presupposition of eternal persons, instead of understand the glory of Jesus Christ, him resurrected and given all power in heaven and in earth. Because what do we see? We clearly see this taught in 1 Corinthians 15. We see this taught in other areas of Paul. It's a consistent theme. So, Mr. Burgos, you're going to have to you're going to prove from Paul's writings that this demands, you said the word demands, that word demands Genesis. It's not in the context. You just asserted, and you've totally negated the reality of the creation of us and the creation of the kingdom that Christ has dominion over all things in heaven and in earth. If there is a new power and authority, that means all things have been created under that authority. And if you don't believe that, then you're going to have to explain to me why in the world would Paul in Colossians 1, 12 through 23, all of a sudden jump from the kingdom of the Son, image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Burgos, does the firstborn of all creation also relate to the reality of the kingdom of the Son, by which all things are created by him and through him and for him? Is he the preeminent one? Matthew 28:18 says so. Ephesians 1 and 2 say so. Colossians 2 says so. So where does firstborn, preeminent of all creation, demand Genesis based upon the context? For in him all things are created. And people will argue about in. Well, great. Let's go to all the translations that have in. No one has a problem translating in Ephesians 1, Colossians 1, everywhere, but right here, you have some translator bias, because it's very important. If Paul wanted to use in, he would have done so, but he doesn't use dia in verse 16. Does he use dia in verse 16? Yes, he does. Well, why doesn't he use it at the beginning of verse 16 if he wanted to say by or through? He doesn't. So you're saying Paul's inconsistent? He doesn't know the language? So when we says then we go here, all things have been created through him and for him. Now, he brings up the image later in the context, and we'll get into that also. Can I ask a simple question? How is for him created for an eternal Son, in the sense of one mind, one will, and the Son is if you want to, the psychological model of the Trinity, when we get into the metaphysics, how is that created for him? How does the psychology of a non-originating entity known as the eternal Son, who does not originate thought in himself, because the Father is the source of all thought, will, and action in the Trinity, and there's not three minds, right? Because you say you're not a social Trinitarian, but yet your persons in your definitions, you create it like it's a social Trinitarian aspect. So can you explain to me why, if it's all the three and the three are one, and you have all those perfect relations, why is it only for him? Why wouldn't it be for the true man, Jesus Christ, the Son of David, the Son of God, the Son of Man? That makes more sense.
If that's what he was thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And it says he is himself. We'll go, oh, he himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Yes, that's the ultimate statement. He himself is before all things. There is not a thing in creation that is before him, because he's been given all power in heaven and in earth. And in him, everything holds together. If Paul, right here in verses 15 and on, is trying to say, well, I'm just going to teach you that Jesus is God, Paul does a terrible job at just simply saying Jesus is God. Why in the world would you use firstborn over all creation?
Yeah.
Why would you even use that?
Yeah. No, that's true. If I could just add with that, is if you look at this idea of all things being, through him and for him, or by him and for him.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, and I think most would agree with this. It seems like a very, I don't think it'd be very surprising if we would disagree with this, but Jesus is not a plan B. So
exactly right.
Like,
he is not plan
I'm
B.
just saying, like the Messiahship of Jesus, this was not a plan. The incarnate, not a plan B. So all creation, both from the very first act when God spoke things into creation through the aspect of new creation, the redemption of this creation, it was all centered around the kingship of Jesus Christ, the messiahship of Jesus Christ. It wasn't a plan B. So I don't think, especially when you're connecting Jesus with wisdom motif, and not so much to be conflated. I think there was a scholar that, I think it was Edwards, who says very carefully, you shouldn't conflate Jesus with wisdom, on a 1-to-1 ratio, but he is the full embodiment of God's wisdom, of God's power, of God's act of redemption and act of creation. So all things are quite literally by him and for him. It doesn't necessarily indicate a literal pre-existent second person, who is the agent in which creation's happening. But more so, if you want to talk in terms of agency, you should talk in terms of the wisdom tradition and how the wisdom of God, the creative power of God, the self-revelation of God to creation, it all is going to be centered around the life, mission, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. This is why we can properly put this into the historic context of the human Jesus' life. And you're not going against the context here. You're not going against the grammar here. This doesn't really prove a literal pre-existence of a second person. It just doesn't even. I think it's not really even the strongest argument for one. I just don't.
And that's it. And I wasn't sure. Did we? I know we're moving along. I don't want to get ahead, but did we hit on the deal with the genitive yet? I heard it.
We haven't. We
danced around it. Yeah, we danced around it.
Yeah, trust me. We get there. We can be here all night. I'm not. Trust me. I want to get in that because I know you got some good stuff on that.
Well, I can exercise patience. Then that's something I have a lot of interest in.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things I was going to bring up, this, of course, that's his paragraph. Now we were reading from the text, but the parallel structures right here, the kingdom and dominions, but BURGOS says Genesis. Now, this is where we get into what we call the flow of the paragraph, right? Inheritance, rescue, kingdom transfer, redemption, forgiveness, right? But when we go down, because there's so much, there's just so much to say. I mean, I've literally over 40 pages. In Paul's survey, now I want everyone to understand this. In Paul's survey, used katizo, which is to create, appears 10 times in Paul's letters. The passages are grouped in the summary table right here. So clearly, here's your category here of clearly new creation, constitutive order, right? Passages, Ephesians 2:10, Ephesians 2:15, Ephesians 4:24, Colossians 3:10. You have original creation, but they are created goods, 1 Timothy 4:3, one time. General creator references Romans 1:25, Ephesians 3:9, 1 Corinthians 11:9, 3 times. Obviously, we have 2 times that Paul uses it here, First Colossians 1:16, right? That's the disputed one. That's what we're trying to prove. This is what I brought up earlier. Christ's role in Genesis creation, a very didactic usage, right? Direct teaching of this word using that the Father and Son created everything together in time past with the Holy Spirit, right? Where is this direct terminology ever used?
Mm-hmm.
0 times. Nowhere does Paul use this word. So please explain to me why just simply you can default image and firstborn to Genesis. And also another thing is, could you show me in scripture where firstborn is used toward God? That is contextually tied to a domain. How is he firstborn over, right, in that sense, over something that he is not ontologically related to?
Mm-hmm.
That's problematic metaphysically.
And I think it's important, and I'm seeing a comment about how can it not be both. I think it's not that there is no kind of a where it's touching any aspect of the Genesis creation. It's again how Jesus' role plays within all things, both new creation and the original creation, is how he's not plan B. And the point is not to put this role that he was a literal pre-existent second person as a mediator of creation, but how God's self-expression is now fully revealed in the man Jesus Christ as the crux of the entire redemptive plan of God that was already conceived in and as the mind of God's plan, and basically that, excuse me, but in the plan of God as it kind of relates to the enthronement of Jesus. So the thing is, the center point is Jesus' enthronement, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I'm also scrolling this, so if anyone wants to go back to the video, they can see this paper and actually read it themselves. They can slow it down, pause it, and read this paper. My goal isn't to go through all this. It's for you to be able to read this text and also read more than what I'm saying, because there's a lot more to this. So this is how I deliver my paper to you, right, on this. So, but can it be both? Well, here's the thing. I agree that Colossians 1 can be about simply within view of create in the paradigm of creation, right?
Yeah.
That's a potential. As I was saying earlier, that's potential. I don't have a problem, but with that position. But when I go through the text, I have to find domain markers, right? I have to find specifics. And to me, when you go through the text, Paul is always focused on Christ is the wisdom of God. And this is like literally the paradigm of God's wisdom. God has brought forth the kingdom and redemptive from the beginning. And as Revelation talk about, the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. Other terminology we get in the First Peter usage also. It talks about dominion authorities that are through Christ, the glory of Christ. We get into Daniel 7. We get all these texts. That is the glory of God beforehand. It's his wisdom. And people just miss this so much, and especially when it comes to even the personification of wisdom. Because when you have to think, when you speak of God, and you speak of God's wisdom, you speak of it as something that is in relationship to God's as ordering, right? That's the reason why they get personification to it, is because it's not different than God. It's just it's like in Proverbs 8. I bring this up a lot. At times wisdom is like the cheerleader, right? That's like going and looking at the blueprints of your house, and as you're building your house, and those blueprints are bringing what you put in plan, are bringing what your thoughts are as it's going on as your glory, right? It's saying, you're looking at it and says, man, that was really good how I designed that. There's an aspect of cheerleading to what you perceive as your wisdom, because it's good, it's perfect, it's holy, it's righteous. In everything it is, it's that which is good. So the wisdom of God brings and shows the glory of God. That's why it is kind of a cheerleader in a certain sense, because it reflects praise toward God, because everyone recognizes it in time. Brother Neil, do you want to say anything? Because I know you love wisdom.
Yeah, and of course I know don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think when you look at the grammatical context of its usage, but especially the purpose of wisdom, as I was reading from one scholar a little while ago, the Jews had to find a way to communicate divine presence imminently, and this is why the diaspora was so traumatic to them as a people, because there were several, as Lee Sennett says, cultic symbols or emblems of divine presence, i.e. the monarchy, presence within the land, the temple, and of course, another aspect that's evading my mind. But what we find is that wisdom became that, especially within the usage of them trying to communicate to those who are obviously being swept up to a degree that may have been inappropriate for a Jewish believer within the rise of Hellenism. This tool of personified wisdom was that means to communicate continued divine presence. And I think when a person reads it or not, they're not able to recognize one, when wisdom personification is being used in the New Testament. And then when you couple that along with not understanding the context of how one should understand wisdom, one, you miss a few things. One, you miss a very lethal testimony to the deity of Christ. Two, you miss the another way that you can speak of the deity of Christ, I believe, as Dunn talks about in the cosmological context, which is probably one of the strongest ways to declare he's God, because it's literally including him into the divine identity. But it's also utilizing that reverential type of imminent language from the Old Testament to show that Christ is the immediate presence of God in a localized way. To me, I just think to take it down just to an apologetic, 1, 2, 3 gotcha, it just divorces it from the richness of his heritage.
I absolutely agree. If the thing is when we look at, whether you get into an Arianism view or some type of, view like their proto-Trinitarianism or whatever historical view, many of them understood that how, especially when you read the many people in our church, they understood wisdom in a different context than a lot of the modern day apologists do. It's not even close to the same thing. I'm just like, I'm not even sure if they're, they're just making up things as they go or what's going on there. But yeah, you're totally divorcing one from the other. It amazes me.
When you talk about the early historical church, forgetting his name, starts with the T of Antioch. I can't think of his name, but he was the one who actually gave us the first Theophilus of Antioch. Yes, he of the type of Trinity. But I said, if that's your Trinity, you might as well let us in the club, because
exactly. Yeah,
wisdom, in spirit, which interestingly enough, wisdom and spirit are interchangeable within that time, which they're used to equate one another for as in reference to Christ, which to me, I'm like, it's a lot of modalistic-y things going on there,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and like kind of reading back over like James Dunn's work on Colossians and how he's relating wisdom to Christ and how God is an aspect of wisdom, or like the incarnation of wisdom per se. And how the focus really, and he kind of cites another scholar here, it's more revelatory than ontological. And I think that's a key thing missing. And this is why I'm like, if Burgos maybe dealt with the historical context and what scholars are saying more established, and maybe he thought like, oh, it's not the purpose, because not the oneness scholars that he dealt with didn't deal as much, except for the fact that actually Norris does deal with the historical context a little bit more in his book I Am. He starts talking about the first century understanding of incarnation, all that stuff. I don't really see Burgos really mentioning the way Norris tries to understand, and the way he's reconstructing historical context of the name and all that stuff. Instead, Burgos goes back to his age-old, let me just put a construction of the grammar out there and say that I'm letting Paul speak for himself. And to me, it's amazing, because he's saying he's letting Paul speak for himself through the grammar. But by not putting Paul, and again, like you, Brendan, I'm not trying to sound like a broken record here, but by not putting Paul within his historical context, he actually puts a straitjacket on Paul. And he's not really letting the text speak for itself, because he is not putting the text within its proper context.
Here's a question for you guys. I definitely think you all should answer this question.
Yes.
Thank you for the question, Rob.
Yeah, I think some, and I have a few of them offhand. We may be about to reach for the same ones, but some of these are not specific to, but I think they may be good for reference. Jesus and the God of Israel by Bauckham are, and one, I'm not saying all of them all agree with one another, but I think they do a really good job of scholastically going through, because Baltman, he has a little bit of a Gnostic thing at sometimes. Boyarin, Borderlines, he touches on wisdom a little bit. R.E. Clement's Wisdom and Theology, Jewish Wisdom in the Hellenistic Age, which I know Brother Smith, I know he's really strong on that one. And one last would be, of course, the famous Christology in the Making by the great, I'm gonna call him Bishop Dunn, Bishop J.
Yeah.
Archbishop J.D.G.
Yeah.
Dunn. Call him a diocesan Dunn. You know, this man here, I'm like, you sure he wasn't one of us? I'm like, goodness gracious.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Did you bring up? Did you bring up our friend Destin Smith?
Yes, and I forgot. And Destin Smith,
Yeah.
he is
Absolutely.
his book is very good. I had told Dr. Smith when we were talking, I said, I had folks asking, like, he's sure he's not one of us,
Yeah. No, and Dustin's a great guy. I really appreciate him. But like, just to show you all the book, this is Dustin Smith's book. It's called Wisdom, Christology, and the Gospel of John. I think he also in his systematic theology book that just came out, he also covers a little bit of wisdom Christology, but this one goes in depth. It's pretty good. It's pretty good research here. I think Dunn, he did an extra work called "Did the First Christians Worship Jesus?" And there is one chapter here in particular that covers that. I think it was chapter 3, and it kind of talks about wisdom a little bit. And he furthers his idea from Christology in the Making. I think another good one is by Sennett. I think Brother, did you already mention Sennett?
I didn't, but it should be.
Personification of Wisdom by Sennett. It's a good source to understanding wisdom Christology, and towards a wisdom Christology by O'Boyle. And then there's one, I think it was by maybe Edwards, actually. Excuse me. Edwards does Jesus, the Wisdom of God here. And this one's a pretty good one. And then I always like when particularly talking about John, and understanding John within the historical context. Is the social science commentary on the Gospel of John by Bruce J. Mullaney, or I think it's Mullaney, yeah, and Richard L. Rothbaugh. But pretty good book when it comes to that aspect. And there's really many more. But if you're starting out, I would go with probably one of the more accessibles, Dustin Smith's book. Christology in the Making is a pillar. It's a little bit more difficult to read, but it is a pillar to understanding of what we're referring to here. And then another, I think you think this one's pretty well. Price wise, it's not accessible.
I know it was pretty high when they. But it was worth the purchase.
Oh yeah.
And, I had to save my lunch money. I said, my Lord.
Did you bring up Randall? Did you bring up Randall Harris?
Oh yes, Randall Harris. The origins of the
free too.
John. It's free because it's in the he wrote it about 100 years ago. I mean, it's literally, I'm not
1917, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a great book, and to see how ahead that man was at his time, it was it is a considering this is so because I was thinking, I said, man, he wrote that a little bit after the Aerocinco Falls revival. I said, and maybe some of the pioneers did have it, but I said, man, if that had become more mainline among us, you talking about even more time that'd have been dangerous. But also John Ronning, John's Logos in the Jewish Targums, or I may be saying that backwards. He hits on it a little bit, but it's good too.
Yeah. I think as far as baseline, that covers the majority of them. Now, they're like, if you're talking about Second Temple Jewish literature in general, there's other sources, but in terms of wisdom Christology, I think there's one more. Brother Hurst, this one, I don't think he's considered a liberal scholar by any means, but even he has to admit some things about personified wisdom. But Ben Whittington's book, Jesus the Sage, about as conservative, I think, as you can get. But even he had to admit about Proverbs 8, wisdom is, Lady Wisdom is not a genuine hypostasis. I don't think, if anything, putting wisdom as a genuine hypostasis is conservative scholarship. If anything, actually, I would argue it's more liberal. Move. It's an apologetic move, but it would be fit more liberal scholarship, such as the great angel Margaret Barker. Now, when I say liberal scholarship, I don't mean like some of the apologists.
You're talking about Germans, higher German criticism.
White Germans, yeah.
Right. It's just...
Yeah. Anyways, there's a context to that, y'all. Yeah.
Videos will be linked at the bottom.
Yeah. At least BURGOS, I mean, is a little bit better than Dane.
Oh, I think, and I said that I was based on an interaction. I will say for BURGOS, I think it is a much more. If we're going to have a person who's writing against the oneness view, I think this does a far better job, especially coming from a person who has never testified to have being a Oneness Pentecostal at one time.
Yeah.
I think he's
No,
done
I'll give
his
him that.
due diligence, I would say.
Who put
Or
the
balloons, as you just showed.
Yeah, I don't know what that. Yeah, no, I can't imagine Damien trying to write a book against us.
And that's the thing. It's like, you could have been that influential if there's never any writing. You mean, what did you produce when you were among us? Like, where's your writings? Like,
There'd be more gaslighting than sources.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, we'll move on to the actual content.
look,
There's never a
too
bad
casual
time
out
to
here.
talk about wisdom Christology, in my view. And also, yeah, and Brother Nero also did a video on, I believe it was Randall Harris's book. Highly invite you to go watch that video. It was a very good video on that. I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up this part, why creation can mean an establishment of the Messianic kingdom order. And this is a very important part for this argument. The obvious objection, right? So, when you go to this argument, there's going to be certain objections, but you have to go to, how does Paul use the term tizo? But created means created, right? It means created. It means things were made. Well, the objection assumes that biblical creation language is always and only about the first material origination of the universe. It is not. In biblical thought, creation can refer to bringing forth a new state of affairs and establishing a people or forming a covenant order, inaugurating a new age, or constituting a new humanity. Paul himself uses katizo for exactly these kinds of realities. Ephesians 2:10, created in Christ Jesus for good works, created in himself one new man, Ephesians 2:15, the new self created after the likeness of God, Ephesians 4:24, and renewed according to the image of its creator, Colossians 3:10. So the question is not whether created is a real word. The question is whether it's created in what domain it occupies. This is extremely important. The lexical evidence confirms this. Burgos' method depends on treating katizo as a univocal pointer to Genesis creation. That claim is false. You have Little Scott, the standard Greek lexicon, lists the sense of found, established katizo, including the founding of cities, settlements, and institutions. It also lists ordinance, institutions, authority created or ordained, and senses of the cognate noun. This is not a marginal reading. It is part of the whole family documented semantic range. Now, when we go to the New Testament, it uses this word in exactly the institutional sense. 1 Peter 2:13 reads, submit to every human institution. Peter's not telling believers to submit every human creature in a biological sense. He's telling them to submit in every humanly established authority, governors, kings, order structures, or governances. That means institutional authority, established, or ordinance. This is a New Testament author using the same word family to note constituted order or governance, right? So when Burgos says created means created, and that means Genesis, the lexicon in the New Testament itself says otherwise. So that's it. It's simply just not an argument. This is where we got into earlier. We brought up the 5 areas where Burgos is going to have to bring in how he's going to import that word to mean Genesis. Now, again, can it be a known term in reference to Genesis? Yes. Not saying it can't be. It's a spectrum of possibility, right? But the question is can you say the context demands it? The answer is no. Because the terminology, the context, nowhere demands it, especially within the context of the kingdom of the Christ. You can say all those things are true when it comes to the glorified Christ who's been given all power in heaven and earth. That is a specific aspect of his authority that he's been given. So we must understand it is extremely important that, one, you have to prove it. And this is where I brought up earlier, Isaiah 9:6. Before Burgos gets to import wisdom Christology as the controlling frame, even though I agree with wisdom Christology, he uses it in a different sense. We must understand that. The prophets already give a kingdom title that fits Colossians 1. Isaiah 9:6 presents the messianic ruler, Aviad, and the Vulgate renders it as the father of the age to come. This is not abstract ontology. It is messianic origination of the coming order, which is in itself wisdom. If the Messiah is the father of the coming age, then all things created in him, through him, and for him is not about a desperate fallback rating. It's exactly what a father of the age does. If you father it, what are you doing? You're creating it. You're bringing it forth. So if he is the father of the age to come, it is literally through him and for him. That's why I brought up earlier, everyone, that when Paul uses through him and for him, and he also uses through him and for God, it's not two divine persons. It's talking about two different things. All things are through God in the sense of creation. But redemption is specifically through Christ. Why? Because without the incarnation, there is no redemption. Without the man, submission, faith, and trust toward God, in Hebrews 5:7, in the days of his flesh, with great tears and supplications to the one who is able to save him from death. And because of his reverence, he was heard. And though he were a son, he learned obedience by the things he suffered. Without that, there is no eternity for us in a good sense. There is no kingdom. There is no power, authority over the heavens and the earth. There is none of that. So if he is the gateway by which all things are through and for, then he is the father of it. That's literally Isaiah 9:6. Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father. Why? Because to have all power in heaven and earth, you have to have a specific authority given. You have to have a unique lordship in creation. We're not talking about divine ontology. We're talking about an assumed authority by which God's wisdom has given authorities and powers in creation. Christ is head over them all. But that's what he does. He tries to smuggle things in. Though they may be possible, we have to make sure contextually we're not demanding it, right? That's the key. You can't demand it. There's
possible versus essential.
Exactly right. And but his terminology was what, Brother Nero? It demands it.
Does it demand it, or are you demanding it?
Exactly right. And that's the difference, because like I said, there's many things we can say about Colossians 1 that are all true. Right. The question is what was Paul intending, right? We can all say in the mind of God, through God's wisdom, these things are true. He foresaw Christ. Christ is the paradigm of things, right? Or we can talk about wisdom Christology. That could be true and used of that sense as well, right? Or it could be a kind of what you call a little bit of everything, wisdom, because wisdom covers literally all of it. It doesn't negate any of it. So that's the keys that we have to understand. It's important to understand what is demanded instead of being so dogmatic. What are the possibilities? How in this can, that's the best way to interpret things. Not so dogmatic, but we have to give answers to possibilities, not just no.
Yeah. I think part of that is the way that he views agency. In order for there to be any form of agency, there has to be a pre-existent second person who is personally the agent of, with the Father. And I think the issue with that again is he undermines the wisdom tradition, wisdom Christology, and his big focus on in being by and not necessarily having to be, or is not necessarily in. I think that kind of undermines the point overall. I don't think it really is fair. I've seen a scholar one time talking about Proverbs, thinking about historical context, Proverbs 3:19, and on the Hebrew, it's also ambiguous, and it could go either way. But I think the point is the context, and the context is that their wisdom is not the source. It's in wisdom. Wisdom is the tool. So just as wisdom is the tool in old creation, or in the the creation narrative, in which God spoke through his creative power, his wisdom, things into existence. So Jesus, being the full incarnation of wisdom, always was meant to be the incarnation of wisdom. Was not again Plan B. Through being like that incarnation, he is the means in which eternal life comes through. He is the means in which, through his enthronement, that is, in which new creation comes through. So even if you want to use the word by, it doesn't really change the context, and that is Jesus as the tool. Jesus as the means which through the source, the Father, has done this. Being the full manifestation of God, nonetheless, because he's the manifestation and not the source. It's through Christ.
Exactly.
Does that make sense? Like, you're getting what I'm putting down there?
Oh, absolutely. That's where, like I was bringing up here, if y'all can read it, when we look at the terminology that Paul uses in Colossians 1:16, Matthew 28:18, where all authority in heaven and on earth is given to Christ, right?
Mhm.
Philippians 2:9-11, I've already quoted, where God high exalted and every knee bows in heaven and on earth and under the earth. Ephesians 1:20-23, the parallel epistle, right, to Colossians, where God raises him, seats him above every rule and authority, and puts all things under his feet, right? Daniel 7 up here through 14 presents the Son of Man as receiving dominion, glory, and a kingdom from the Ancient of Days. Now, I just wanted to make a slight pause here. Burgos is probably losing his mind a little bit because, Mr. Burgos, if you ever do watch this, we're not skin suitors. We believe in the true humanity of Jesus Christ. So when we say that there's a true man, there's a true man. This man is the perfection of God in an authentic human condition, under authentic human relations, and he has all the things necessary to qualify as one who has faith, love toward God, his fellow man, and his own existence, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself. So we believe that Jesus is the perfection of God as true man. He's the Word made flesh. He's the image of the invisible God, right? So in all those things, when we look at this reality, Christ it's demanded according to the scriptures. And I would say this highly, and I don't minimize the word demanded. It is demanded by any interpretation of scripture that Christ has true submission and true will through his human existence toward God. Otherwise, he can't be justified.
Right.
How can you raise and glorify a flesh suit? You can't. We do not believe that Jesus is an Apollinarian person, right? Apollinarian type of existence. No, we believe in a true human existence. Now, whether you want to call that hypostatic, whether you want to get into what diaphysitism and all that, and the various understandings of how that works, and like I said, the spectrum that is, because some people will call that Nestorianism, yet then other people will call it this, that, and the other. Between Apollinarianism and Nestorianism, there's a spectrum of diaphysitism, right? Wherever that is, we believe in a true man, and Jesus is the perfection that one true God as true man. And so when we say that God is truly brought about redemption through one who learned good and to reject evil, grew in wisdom and in stature, and all those things, those are absolutely true. That doesn't make a second divine person. That makes God realized in a true, authentic human existence, in a true, authentic human capacity.
Right. And I think that's why we always have to take into account in what ways God manifests himself. And in the relations to the incarnation, God manifests himself as a true human person. So you have the one, to wit, God was in Christ. Christ is a genuine, when you say human, I mean, he has a human mind, a human will, like you're saying. He has a relationship towards his God. But the reason why we can honestly say that that is God manifested, ultimately manifested in the flesh, is because it is the fullness of God's presence and power for the purpose of his redemption manifested in a true ontological human state as a genuine man who has a relation towards God.
I completely agree. That is a sore spot for me, especially when it comes to I would say anemic forms of articulation of the incarnation, because to be fair, it does lead some people to honestly present us as thinking that, because some people they've talked to, that is the presentation they give. Mm-hmm. But I would imagine in this case, that shouldn't be a factor, because, of course, seeing the level of intimacy with our writers and perhaps maybe within our zeal to promote the deity of Christ historically, we have not spent enough time just focusing on articulating the true humanity, because I guess it was a given, but perhaps that is an area of opportunity for us to really just, I don't want to say nail it down, but just really buckle down even more so than even past maybe in some of the position papers, but just in more writings dedicated to this subject alone.
Yeah. I don't know, Chris, if you're ready to move on, I think hearing Brother Nero's spiel on the dia and the genitive, I think that could be a good next point, unless you have something else before that.
Yeah, I just wanted to cover one thing real quick.
Okay.
I know that's go right back here. This is an important part when it comes to 17, because the reason why I'm focusing so much on 16, 17 is because ultimately that's the linchpin of the passage, right? That's extremely important to understand. The powers list shows ordered rule and not necessarily a Genesis workshop. Paul names thrones and divisions, rulers, and language of rank, jurisdiction, and administration, as we've mentioned before, right? He does not list sun, moon, stars, seas, land, animals, or in the beginning. He doesn't list any of those things. Notice, what are the domain markers besides simply saying that created means Genesis? That's the important part. The same terms, everyone, appears in Colossians 2:10. Head of all rule and authority. 2:15. Disarm the rulers and authorities at the cross. Literally within the own letter, Paul is giving you the context and the domain by which these terms are being used and framed, right? It could be out of that, but the evidence is pushing one direction. The same terms, the same letter, one chapter later, the domain is headship plus cross, victory, and not necessarily Genesis creation, right? The post-resurrection economic order confirms the kingdom frame. Christ is mediator, 1 Timothy 2:15. He is the high priest, Hebrews 7:24-25. Head of the body of the church, 1:18. Seated at the right hand until his enemies are subdued. Psalms 110:1. While God remains his God and head. I want you all to realize that. While he has all power in heaven and earth, this is why 1 Corinthians 15 is so important, because the Son is given all power in heaven and earth. That means he didn't have it, and then he's given it, and then in 15, he's subjected back. How does that work? So when we understand that, that specific aspect, we have to understand in Colossians 11:3 and Revelations 3:12, and also in John, Jesus post-resurrection has a God. The text clearly tells us this. uh, 1 Corinthians 11:3, who's head over Christ? God. Who's head over man? Christ. Who's head over the woman? Man. So why? Because this isn't about divinity. It's order of the divine in every way by the means of God bringing about a resurrected man and giving him all power in heaven and earth in the created order. That's a dominion and a domain difference than transcendency. We must understand that. Transcendency in God's domain and the created domain are two different things. That is the wisdom of God to have dominion and order. And I think, especially Brother Nero, I think talking about, the different angelic authorities and powers, Michael Heiser and all this, and how all that works. Obviously, there are domains and authorities that God has put forth in creation, the order of the stars, the heaven, all this thing. So ultimately, Christ has attained authority not just over the church, but that's the point in the clearness of the text. Paul talks about the kingdom of the Son, and then he goes that he's the image of the visible God. His reign isn't just over the church, everyone. It's over the cosmological order. He's been given all power in heavens and the earth. You're basically ripping out between 12 and 14 and verse 15 and saying, that's Genesis, and we're going to skip the angelic realm, the heavenly realm. We're going to just jump to the church. You have basically taken the passage that literally gives you the full order of the Christ's glory of after the resurrection and the power that he has, and you basically stripped out the one aspect of it. That's what you've done.
You made to Ponta no Ponta. I got my dad jokes. I had got them in my left pocket.
I think we'll have to make a short for that one.
To Ponta to no Ponta. Huh?
Exactly right. And that's the thing. To simply say it demands it, and then not having a sequential order of the glory of the. And here, everyone has to understand something. Every bit of this is the glory of the Father. Philippians 2. It's the glory of the Father, not the Trinity. Read Ephesians 1, everyone. I beg you go through there. Put God there and put the Father, and see how quickly you come to who's brought this all about.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it's not the Trinity; it's the Father.
Which is why, again, all this demanding. Oh, the text demands this, and I hate to harp on it too much, but when he's talking about again in I think it's verse 16, the word "in," epsilon noon. And he's saying that, it's disingenuous to say that it literally means "in," which is funny because it's kind of disingenuous because it does literally mean "in." And in some contextual purposes, it can mean "by," but on the more wooden translation, it means "in." And it's funny because what you're talking about here is because he's retrojecting his understanding of the him. He's trying to make Jesus the source, in a sense, the source of creation. Because he's homoousios with the Father. He's one in essence, and trying to make that eternal aspect, and he's just retrojecting it in. And what's funny is you get Trinitarian scholars, and just to say that it's ambiguous, it's disingenuous. It was N.T. Wright disingenuous when he thinks the more wooden translation that we should keep is the word "in." Is it disingenuous for? No, he's liberal, but James.
He's a liberal scholar.
He's a liberal scholar. But is it disingenuous for him to put the more wooden translation as "in," or the NRSV to use "in"? And I'm not saying that right there determines that it must mean "in," but the point is you're the one who says it demands this, right? But if you look at this kingdom aspect, right, that this kingdom paradigm that Chris is providing here, and you undergird that with the wisdom traditions, would you say the immediate context could definitely mean the wooden version of "in," which literally means on a typical basis, and how would that be disingenuous? That's just
I didn't even understand that in his arguments at all. I mean, literally,
I don't even know how that passed the editorial team, to be honest with you.
Well, he's over it.
Huh?
Well, I say, well, he's over it, so I guess that would give him privileges to do that, I guess.
Damian Richardson type arguments there. But, yeah, historic Christianity says this.
Until you're talking about baptism. Until you talking about baptism. We get to baptism. We don't care what the church fathers say. It's bad. I say you got to say, my Lord, good God from Mississippi.
I've never. It's like where you get the Protestants who don't believe baptism saves. I've never heard a group so arbitrarily brings up church history until you bring up something that goes against their doctrine. Now all of a sudden, church history don't matter.
L'apologist.
You might as well be all the way in or all the way out. Either church history doesn't predetermine your doctrine, or it does.
Well, if they went all the way in, they'll be Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. If there was, if they were really in this the historic church, I always say, which historic church you talking about? Like, it's about 3 or 4.
They might as well be all the way out. You know what I mean? Yeah. Their methodology should be just all the way out. I don't. You know what I mean? We can glean from those church fathers, but to just throw it in someone's face to show like, oh, well, they always believe this. The church always believed this. And I think that's disingenuous. Yeah.
It's such a lot. Even the Trinity has had the developments, but even like I would say one thing is very consistent is baptism, but it shows the inconsistency in the argumentation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But we brought up I'm Lily. If Paul meant to say, by him all things created, why didn't he just make Dia carry that whole thing right there, right? Because he uses it in other texts, in other aspects of the text. There's tons of other places he uses it, but here he doesn't. Because N points to sphere, realm, locatedness, and ordering frame. Dia points to mediated realization. And ice points to goal or end or telos. So when you go through the text, I just did a quick search. The Berean Standard Bible for in him, the Berean Literal Bible because in him, Legacy Standard Bible for in him all things were created, American Standard Bible for in him were all things created, English Revised Version for in him were all things created, the Weymouth New Testament for in him, Majority Standard Bible for in him, Young's Little Translation because in him, Dewey Reams for in him, the Catholic Public Domain Version for in him, New American Bible for in him, the NRSV, another Catholic, for in him, God-be New Testament because in him, the Literal Emphasis Translation since in him, Worrell New Testament because in him, the New International Version for in him. Now,
well,
I'm not trying to say that. Yeah, I mean, but I'm not trying to push it. But man, why are you dogging people for?
It was already pushed.
Yeah, man, I just don't understand it.
It's that oneness propaganda.
Oneness propaganda.
Oneness propaganda.
Yeah, it amazes me. At times, if anyone understands what's their posts on, been quite amusing. What number are y'all up to now on that?
I think how many 16 or 17.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah,
it's
not quite the 20.
That was
absolutely awesome.
That was. I said, my Lord.
Yeah.
So, which if we can go to Dia, definitely. Brother Nero, would you like to lead us off there on that argument?
Yeah, because I think it's on page, and I'll read a little bit of it. It's dealing with some of his argumentation, and I will say, as it relates to his book, the grammatical arguments trying to be as unbiased, I think were his strongest arguments, because I think sometimes historically we have been reactionary. Because we're just trying to stop that, but I think
Absolutely.
historically, and I think the good thing about this criticism will drive us to look further into the conversation, I think, and further it. But I will say it did challenge me some years ago when confronted with some of these things, because I believe historically we were at the right place, but I think it's kind of the way we got there. We're not necessarily obeying the conventional rules of Greek grammar, and the only way you can break a rule of Greek grammar, you gotta, or the norm of it, you got to come with a better way to do it. So, my proposition, at least from my research, is that we could use the mainline scholarship as it relates to syntax and all of these things, and when using a holistic hermeneutic, still come to a very oneness position. And he makes a interesting criticism of one he uses. I think it's on page 37, where he says, in the above, Arnold affirms intermediate agency is indicated by dia with the genitive. And I think there has been some writings that have tried to even say that this is just instrumental agency, which maybe in a few instances, but I would say, to be honest, from a scholastic standpoint, D with the genitive does mean that. But even with it meaning that, does every time that it's used come to that conclusion? I just want to go over a few notes that I have, and I mentioned already with Romans 11:36, the dia tu tapanta, how it's used there. But dia with the genitive, the good thing about it is that we see it not only in the Old Testament and Proverbs, which I believe Dr. BURGOS even admitted in our debate that he did see it there, but also you see it much more in the intermediate, in the other wisdom literature, like Wisdom 9:1-2, where it talks about he's creating by word, by wisdom. And even though dia isn't used every time, that is showing that precedent of God using it. And so when we get a little bit later on and seeing it with Philo's logos theology, dia tu legu, to me, is showing a connection there that's going to be important. And as I mentioned earlier, with a lot of that writing, especially the wisdom literature, there are some philosophical, cosmological background considerations that has to be observed. One is the Stoic and Middle Platonic writers use what we would probably call causal triads. Now, again, I want to make it clear, I'm not advocating an adoption of the entire Greek metaphysical framework, but just recognizing the context of the wisdom literature, that there are some categories that they would use to exploit, but we do not see them using all of them, and pretty much all of them that will be needed later for the later Trinitarian controversies. But those kind of triads, from whom, through whom, toward whom, this wasn't unique of Paul. And I think it would be laughable to think that Paul, who could quote Epimenides of Crete in Acts 17 when preaching, did not know about this. It'd be almost absurd. These were common explanatory frameworks for structure of reality, divine governance, which would deal with the principalities and all of those things, and also metaphysical dependence. And so Paul's use of dia participates in the shared intellectual environment of his time. And so when we see this as Christ as the mediating agent, Christ as the revelatory instrument, Christ as divine wisdom embodied, seeing that this is steeped so much in wisdom language, what other phrase or preposition would he use? This is right in the context of how the prepositions have used. And so when Dr. BURGOS makes the arguments of dia with the genitive, it must mean ontological distinction within the nature of God. I think that's jumping the gun, especially when you have not provided the historical context to prove what's exactly going on. But I think the grammatical reality shows us that dia can apply to God himself or the Father many times. It can describe divine attributes. It can describe representative mediation, and it also can function rhetorically within hymns. And so when you go to the context of dia with the genitive in like Colossians 1:16, that reflects the established Jewish practice of describing divine creative action as mediated through wisdom or word, I think Paul's Christological claim lies not in inventing a new metaphysical category of divine revelation, of mediation, but in identifying Christ as the embodied and eschatologically decisive locus of that mediation. In doing this, I think is going to go hand in hand again. Colossians, somewhat of an apologetic. One thing that they have in common is that the people who he is writing against, they obviously accept the wisdom language to be a basis of something they both agree on. Paul doing this preserves strong cosmic Christology, Jewish conceptual continuity, and grammatical plausibility. And so I just think when I see and like, wait a minute, D with the gender must be a second divine person. It's just like, yeah, really? That's all you got from that. But to be fair, historically, we have not, I would say, engaged with this on a larger scale. I'm just trying to be as fair as I can in my mind, because maybe the person is just feeling this happy birthday.
Where am I getting these balloons from? It's not from me.
Look, somebody's prophesying. Like they said, look,
is someone doing it to me? Is that a thing?
I'm not sure. I said brother Father Cloud got the oil. I said some good things are happening for you. Lift your hands right now. In 20,
it's not me doing it. I know that. But yeah.
I don't know who it is. Said like 3 times now.
No, it just, to me, when you look at the tradition, the gram, all that, none of that is mentioned within the word. It just, I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab this D with the genitive. And because some of us have said some dumb stuff as it related to grammar, he's capitalizing on that. But I think in actuality, this is something that's going to backfire, because instead of being an argument for the Trinity, it has opened the world of like, wait a minute, how come you weren't saying all of this that came along with it? But I get to feeling good. I get my organ in a minute, you know.
Right. And brother, why don't you expound a little bit more what you mean by ontological distinction between Father and Son, just so there's no clarification, so there's no, oh, you're strong in the Trinity. They're not ontologically distinct. Just
right, like or as personally distinct and create. Is that what you're asking? Like,
yeah, just I know what you meant, but just clarify, because I don't want you to get clipped.
They'd be like, oh yeah, he said we got 2 gods. And like, no, right. Like many of them are saying, well, Christ, he was the one the Father made everything through as another person. So it wasn't an inanimate object, like just talking about his word or something like that. And grammatically, I would say that is valid, which would cause us to have to do more explaining why the Apostle Paul is using this language, because he knows how to use instrumental mediation, but he doesn't. So to be fair, grammatically, it does mean personal instrumentality. But why would he adopt this? Is it a coincidence from the genre and all these things that he's using, that these are the exact same ways that it's described? But Jews did not really think wisdom was like, hey, throw it to me, God the Father, and I'm gonna create things too. It would have been laughable. And this would not have even been anything on anybody's mind. And evidence of that is looking at it in the description. He doesn't do a lot of explaining. It's almost like a given that they understand that. But I think, and this is my theory, and if I'm wrong, y'all pray for me, but one of the things I've noticed in looking at some of the church fathers, I accept right now, like they do like they do it. Like, everybody speaking to us real fast. You like the charismatic church around the corner. They got the tongue room.
Praise him when it's Jesus.
I know, right? Look, if you don't praise him, you got to be ontologically specific, theologically. I think it's I think it's just laughable. It sounds good, but it just divorces all of it from its original context. And I had a thought, it just left me. Sure, it's my wife's fault on that. Stole it, but it'll be back. But I would just invite anybody to dig into the wealth of riches as it relates to the language, because Osborne, I'm gonna quote him one more time: grammar tells you what was said. It takes context to tell you what was meant. What you will notice, apologists are not good at context. Many times that's what you'll find.
No. And what they do is when they say, oh, you're missing the context, they're just going to once again repeat the same old grammatical statements that they've heard their whole life, and it doesn't really provide any actual meaning to it. It only just tells you a little snippet of what was said. Like, for instance, yeah, we can see some form of agency, but in what way is there agency? And this is why I think Doug's work, again, I'll put it up again for someone if they want to read something. This is a good commentary on Colossians and Philemon. I've more so focused a little bit on the hymn of Colossians when reading Dunn here. Not really gotten into Philemon yet, but nonetheless, I think he hit something here a little bit more. It's focusing on revelation more so than ontological. And what I mean by this is the agency, and I think, I don't know if you would agree, Brother Nero, but when it comes to wisdom and agency, it's more so God revealing his presence and power in, and not a literal intermediary figure, but a personified manner. And that's why you'll see people like Bernard, although maybe there's a little better language, but for lack of better terms, would say Jesus is the personification of the human personification of God's presence and power. That's why Bernard would say stuff like that. But simultaneously, that's also why Bernard can say in the same video that I'm referencing to, it's one that him and Norris did a few years back on the oneness view of Jesus Christ. You can find it on, like, I think the UPCI or on David K. Bernard's page. But he can even say that Jesus is the fullness of God's, fullness of God's being in person, revealed in a human person. He can call Jesus rightfully a human person, and I don't think that goes against a oneness methodology or oneness per se. Well, not Christology, but metaphysics of the Godhead, but more so showing how the one God revealed himself in and as the man Jesus Christ, where this is not just merely a prophet, but this is the fullness of God's presence revealed from the virgin conception in this man Jesus Christ. And when we're talking about personal agency, again, it's through the revelation of God's character revealed as this man. It's about revelation, not literal ontological agency.
And that thought just came back to me, just flew back. I said, I'm glad y'all told me to speak in tongues real fast. That must have. But no, the thought process on it. One of the reasons you may say, well, why they have to talk like that? One, I think it's so important, especially when reading the Bible, because it is a great, portion. It's an ancient Near Eastern text. I have to realize that they are not Westerners, that they have conventions, mediums, and instruments of expressing things just like we do. Like Pentecostals, we have a way of saying, "Woo, God, sure enough moved." Now, a person that doesn't know what we mean by that, we mean we had good church by means of the Spirit and all that. But even we have idioms that we have developed within our local context. What will make us think the ancients did not have them? And when you look at, especially, and I'm going to probably say it the last time, hopefully not anymore, but during Hellenized Judaism, the major issue they're facing is, how do I communicate the fact that within the confines of the Jewish religion, you already have sufficient language and background to communicate these ideas. And one of the things that they were fighting, which is why they moved away from anthropomorphisms, and you see memory even using the Targums, is because they have to maintain the transcendence of God, but have the immanence. Now, within the Hebraic faith, they don't have this almost demiurge separation where the divine cannot interact within the created world. That's not a Jewish problem. But within the Stoic Middle Platonic world, anything that can interact within the created side of the world is categorized as something created, which would mean it's not God or part of the highest good or something to that extent. This is why this intermediary language was used, because even with Philo, you got wisdom, logos, power. All of these things were described to communicate this, to distance, not to divide or separate ontologically, so to speak. And I would say a good example that most people even look past as it relates to personification, that nobody even thinks that Paul is trying to say the good that I would do. Evil is always present. Now, he's personifying his impetus, whatever it is, by his fallen nature to do some stuff. Now, do you think that it's really this other guy that's in the Paul Godhead that looks like him, that, he said, I want to, but the other Paul doesn't? We all understand Paul is referring to himself. And even in the New Testament, there's a book called, it's on the connection between personification and Pauline literature. Paul uses this all of the time. Nobody says, man, I wonder who's that, what is that thing in Paul that makes him want to do bad stuff? This is part of their grammatical world and their literary world. And I'm a land, I want to keep going.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me a thought. Here's a not to. This actually, I think this is a really good semi-technical book, but a really good book by Brother Bernard. It's called Justification of the Holy Spirit, and he spends, I think, an entire chapter on personification in Romans, and I think it really relates because he talks about the personification of sin and different aspects of personification. But if you look at the connections there in like Romans 8 and stuff, just as sin is personified, I can see God's power and presence. The Spirit is also personified. I once had a question posed to me by a Trinitarian cartel. And he, he was big on who's interceding in Romans 8. Like, well, no, the Spirit is personified there. It seems very clear. I don't think there's literally
You pulled
a
it on me
person
too.
within me, because the Spirit's inside of us. We all partake in the Spirit. Is literally using words and interceding on our behalf. I think it's a way, a personification of the Spirit of speaking when God quickens to your mind as you're praying, or when you're praying in tongues, where it's it's like the Spirit of God, the power of God is interceding on your behalf, but nonetheless personification. So when you talk about idioms, you talk about these things, people always want to take face value interpretations when it serves their theological purpose. But what people don't realize is everyone has, because when you're taking certain things on face value, right, there's going to be verses that contradict that if you're taking it at face value, and not putting it within its historical context and all that jazz, right? Well, with that, they're going to have to resurface other verses to fit what the verse that they originally took at face value. And I would say that this is kind of the same with BURGOS. He's going to have to expound when it comes to Colossians, when it comes to other passages. He's going to have to expound. First, where's the Spirit involved in this? He has to make up a metaphysical reason. Or how is Jesus in this case, even if we were to take this to prove something about Jesus, why is firstborn not literal, not face value? Well, scholars, he'll say, it's all known that it's talking about preeminence, right? Firstborn of the dead, and a few verses later, that's going to be taken literal.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that not taken at face value? So he's having to, because he takes something at face value here, he's going to have to eventually abandon that. This is why I am not against this idea of having complex interpretations to try to understand things, right? My problem is these are the same people who's telling you to look at the basic meaning of the text, the basic meaning of the grammar, but they don't focus on the historical context. I know we're going to sound like broken records when we say this, but when you have a book link that's making the same mistake over and over again, we're going to have to point out the same mistake over and over again. It's going to be like this in Hebrews. It's going to be like this in John. He does not deal with the historical context. He does not. He tries to take this face value because he thinks it's going to serve his purpose. But when there's complications, now he wants this complex and as, I want to get flagged for, using a liberal scholar, but Dan McClone says he's going to negotiate with the text. And this is why I don't really have as much patience for when someone tries to tell me the basic meaning like that. It's just, I think it's really, at its core, it's presuppositional theology. I'm going to triumph my theology over you. I'm going to use these basic proof texts, kind of mess around with the grammar, give you a baseline of the grammar, and then say, oh, here's the face value meaning. But then when there comes complications to the fullness of, as Chris will talk about, the psychology or the what you call the economy of what they believe. Now they're going to have to rework and negotiate a little bit more with the text. So, I mean, I love what's going on here. I think, I mean, maybe we'll talk about the last couple verses and then call it a night because we're already at 2 hours and I feel like we've kind of been dancing around the whole text, but maybe the last few verses can get a little bit more.
Yeah, I was
attention
wanting to get
to it.
into a real quick point about what Brother Nero was talking about on Dia.
Yeah, go for it.
Because there's two aspects here, right? if you want to get into wisdom aspect, or if you want to get into literal agency, right? The problem is he doesn't have a way to argue against the position, because both of these are potentially true, even by Trinitarian scholars, or you can get into the economics of how the kingdom of Christ works. Because Burgos puts too much weight on dia in that sense that he argues dia plus genitive can mark personal agency. Okay, great. Colossians 1:16 must be teaching a distinct pre-incarnate son acting as a creator agent. That's his whole point. But that does not follow. Why? Because his own material states the point very correctly in that grammar describes relations and functions, which is what Brother Nero brought up, right? Context. It does not generate ontology by itself. Dia can mark mediation, it can mark agency or means, but that still does not prove an independently originating divine subject. Burgos still needs to he needs a bridge premise from through him to therefore the Son is a distinct eternal creator agent. And that bridge is never supplied by simply just stating, well, dia, right? You have to show economy of the argument, not just simply make a claim and say, well, it refers to creation. No, because we've provided an economy by which dia can be used economically with a subject of redemption. Therefore, your argument, Lily, has fallen in front of you by your own demands. We've already supplied that. So, Paul's own control of the text cuts against Burgos' conclusion. In 1 Corinthians 8:6, which is what Burgos brought up earlier, he also brings up later, Paul explicitly distributes the role asymmetrically. The Father is the source from whom are all things, while Christ is the means through whom are all things. You can't argue that that is not talking about redemption. You have to agree to that. Now, whether you want to say it's Genesis, that you could do that, but you can't say it cannot be about redemption, and it's about the Father through the Messiah. Go to Ephesians. Show me where Genesis is there. You are not going to find it. So the problem is that when you use these demands and you say, okay, 1 Corinthians 8:6, well, there's God and there's Lord. Well, why does he do that also in Ephesians 4:4-6? Because there's economies that are distinct from God. You go to 1 Corinthians 12. There are administrations, right? There's giftings. You have different aspects in 1 Corinthians 12. And there's operations. So when we understand this economy and redemption, we understand the Lord doesn't demand deity in a sense of a transcendent aspect. It's about authority and power given. This is essential for redemption. That's the glory of the Father. That's the glory of Christ is the self-expression of the Father, and that is his means to redeem mankind himself. Not someone else, but it's his own personal self-expression to redeem through this man, Jesus Christ. So when we see through whom are all things, and in contrast to from whom are all things, it does not demand creation. Now, it can mean within view of wisdom. It can mean all those things. We don't negate that. But what I'm saying is it does not demand just simply one economic value, and it only can mean two persons in the Trinity. It doesn't demand that because God and Lord are distincted. Think about that. If Lord just means Yahweh, why are you making Yahweh distinct from God? That doesn't even make sense. Why would you do that? But you can understand the kingdom is subjected back to the Father. You shall reign until all enemies have been put under your feet. Well, that is a lordship given, and there is a reign that is subjected back, and the kingdom is delivered up to the Father in 1 Corinthians 15. So through means is Christ. So it's through the means of Christ. There's an economic and redemptive age by which we realize, and then we move on to the ultimate age of the whole of eternity in new creation in Revelations 21. That's where he makes all things new. So real quick, Brother Nero has also brought Romans 11:36, which strengthens the point because Paul can use the same source as means and goal pattern of these prepositions with God alone without anyone imagining multiple divine persons. The BURGOS cannot treat the mere presence of dia as through. It automatically proves to eternal divine operators. And one thing I wanted to also bring up on firstborn that Tim brought up, BURGOS uses firstborn, and the problem is when he does this, and this is something that Tim brought up and we've a little bit discussed before, this is extremely important. He said it has been well established contextually that prototokos means the son's preeminence rather than temporal priority. Well, where was that proven? Where is that demanded? Again, he starts using the absolute thing.
They have to say that because of Aries.
Yeah. But he does not actually establish that from the flow of Colossians and then conclude it. He just simply asserts it. He asserts it after already loading verse 15 with his creator son reading in verse 16. That matters because lexical possibility is not the same thing as contextual proof. Even if we grant him this point, that firstborn here is just simply only about preeminence, right? Not creaturely origin. That still does not hand him an eternal son conclusion. It only tells us that the word is functioning as a rank title. And rank always raises the next question. Preeminent over what? And I cannot begin to tell you how important this is. In what order and in what realm? BURGOS does not answer that hardly, if any. His documents answer that the realm question directly, only in the sense that he asserts it, right? In Scripture, firstborn is consistently a title conferred supremacy within an ordered domain. So you can't just ontologically make it about God's firstborn. That doesn't even make sense. How is God in that sense even used? That's what I said earlier. If he's trying to simply just prove deity or being God, what are we doing? I mean, why would you even use firstborn at all? David is called firstborn, as we all know. And all that. So we all understand that supremacy is all about it. But most important, Paul himself explains the firstborn in the paragraph. And BURGOS doesn't even cover it because Colossians 1 uses firstborn twice. And the second use is interpreted in a way that we have to be very, very careful. Because if firstborn just simply means preeminence, right? I want y'all to think about this. If firstborn just simply means preeminence, then why does Paul say he was firstborn so that he might have preeminence if order has no relation at all? And if Paul is telling you that order is important here, why would we conclude that in verse 15 that order isn't important there either. If he gives you the contextual bounds of what prototokos is. So the same arguments that he was using before about, well, Bernard, he just does it without context. Show me in the context where firstborn in Paul's usage just simply is about preeminence versus order. Because if Christ is the fathering or something, that means he's the ordering of it all. Plain and simple. It's through him. It's through the incarnation and the glorification of that man. That's why he's the father of the ages or the world to come, depending on what your translation is. But yeah, I just the whole argument on firstborn is just very poor to me. I've never understood, and they just had to throw to preeminence because everyone wants to argue, but it's a very poor word to use if you're just trying to prove Jesus is God. There's how many ways, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, how many ways could you say Jesus is God with the Father in creation before the world was, and not simply just use prototokos or weird terms like image of? And that's a whole other thing we really ain't got into the term image, right?
All of those wisdom terms.
Yeah. I mean, why in the world how does image contextually, was God ever without his image? That's a whole bunch of metaphysical arguments there. How was God ever without his image? So, Jesus, the eternal Son, is that a distinct attribute of the eternal Son? Image? Whoa. Let's think about that for a second here. Was God, Burgos says, was God without his wisdom or his word? Wait a minute. So is that a specific attribute to Jesus, his wisdom and word? Whoa. How's that working? So what you're saying is the person of the Father does not have his own wisdom? That's getting a little social.
Because he sent it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we all agree that it is the word of the Father, the Spirit of the Father, right? Which never makes sense in their view. I've never understood that, unless you're a true classical Trinitarian, which this is the whole point. Burgotarianism versus classical Trinitarianism, and some of the language he uses. That's a very problem that we will eventually get into as well. But Burgotarianism has problems if you're going to try to be strict with your arguments versus what a classical metaphysical view is. So we have to be very careful here and how he's using image, word, and wisdom and simply predicating it to the Son as if it's only the Son's. Well, in the eternal relations of origin, they're all identical in everything except their relations, right? That's the only distinction, except for the function that could be seen potentially in creation, right? But it's all one action. They all mutually indwell each other. So there's a lot of problems when he starts making these very weird metaphysical claims and he's not really thinking about what's actually being said, because he doesn't really cover a lot of metaphysics in his book in a mid to high sense.
I haven't seen metaphysics really dealt with.
Yeah, so exactly. And so, I literally have like 4 pages just simply on very problematic questions, just on his metaphysical understanding of how he assumes things here. Because you're making distinct attribution to the Son and seemingly to the Son alone. That's really odd. Add an ad intra or ad extra, man.
Yeah. And that's, speaking of like the psychology of that, and that's why in the last few verses, when I know in the actual Greek text, actually verses 19 and 20 don't have theos in there. It doesn't have the word God. It's contextually assumed to try to bring clarity in the English, because he's obviously the subject here. But when it talks about the language of, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. What we have here is God is, when you're making a distinction between God and Jesus in Trinitarian's world, it's the Father and the Son, two divine persons, right? So are they saying that, and I know they might lean to like a perichoresis type deal, but I don't know if that quite fits the context of Colossians again. Because when you're looking at it through the verse, you have him, it's all the fullness of God. It's not just the fullness of him just being divine, right? It's the fullness of the Father dwelling in him. And I don't know if you have anything to add there, Chris, but I see that as, in this case with God, you can't try to say, oh, well, that's talking about the ontology of Jesus more so than talking about the the Father dwelling in Jesus and Jesus being the full. And that scholars would say this is showing Jesus as the full representation, or maybe not just representation, the fullness of God revealed, manifested.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a whole lot to that.
Yeah.
And it becomes. I mean, there's so many angles and ways to go to attack that. And what do you think was probably the biggest problem with his position in your estimation?
The biggest problem is that even though he shows a wide range of material, he clearly, in order to, I think, to enforce his position as looking stronger than it is, he took out one of the strong suits of Bernard's position. And that is, he did cite a contextual verse to substantiate that this is talking about the human person. So in order to avoid the actual messiness of the subject and the strength of our arguments here, he decided to omit it and say that, oh, he just didn't have one. And I think right there, that already shows you that best case scenario, presuppositions got the best of him. Worst case scenario, it was ironically disingenuous of him to actually put that in there.
Yeah.
I think it ruins his whole position, because he's not actually dealing with a substantial point of our view that would actually be more something to interact with to see why is yours actually better than ours. Instead, he just omisses it and tries to act like we don't really have any leg to stand on. He's, puffing up his chest instead of actually dealing with the arguments.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, there's certain areas, I don't want to be, because I do think, overall it's a book that does a lot. I mean, it does. I mean, I just think there's sometimes he's too quick to dismiss, right?
Reformed Baptist in him,
Yeah.
And being reformed, I was thinking about too, a lot of the presupposition apologetic approach. I said that is something very common.
Yeah, I mean, where's it at? When you have this, you go ahead.
I was going to say, and part, and I'm going to be honest with you, when you're doing live, when we do lives and all this, you and Tim and Brother Nero, you've both seen this. Yeah, people come up, they think, oh, he's oneness. I'm going to run my quick flesh suit arguments against him. Contradictory, Jesus prayed to himself. Define self. That's not even possible in our view. They just come up with flesh suit arguments, and it's just like outside of that little box, the avenue of argumentation, once they actually engage in the arguments, they really don't have a lot to push back on.
Yeah.
Because most people define their argument as distinction between Jesus and the Father, which we believe in distinctions. That's essential in our view. And so therefore we prove a distinction. Well, we throw up our hands and walk away. Well, that's no. And sometimes I think Dalcourt does that a lot. And Burgos doesn't do it as bad. As I said before in the first video.
Not nearly.
I think his book is way better than Dalcourt's book.
Yeah, exactly. but he still has that tendency to just, I've given a general overall view, and I'm kind of done.
Right.
And
Yeah, keep going.
it's like I said,
It's like we got
there's
him.
more. Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully, his fourth book, he adds some more stuff and bring up some points, because I'll be reading that one too. I've got his third edition here. But to me, that's very important. That hopefully, no, he adds a little, quite a bit more to it. I'll definitely read that. But yeah, it's just, I just found Burgos's contextual reading very lacking. Even if it's an argument against Unitarian or whoever, he just didn't engage with the context at all.
No,
I mean,
down.
No, I mean he just presupposes created, and he just, well, I'm done, and it's like, man, what about all of the Pauline literature that literally covers the same terminology? You don't discuss any of it. You don't.
Yeah.
I mean, it's everywhere.
I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point there, because like I'll give you two more things. It's like why cite Bernard reference that this seems more of a problematic for a oneness control, or like a basically it's harder for a oneness understanding, like Colossians, right? But then does not deal with Norris's answer. Norris doesn't
He
just
had to know it
and be like,
existed.
huh?
He had to know it existed.
Right. Well, yeah, it's the same pages. You know what I mean? This is the following paragraphs, and I can understand. Yeah, sorry, but anyways, I can understand like why Norris can sometimes be in the book. He's storytelling, so sometimes he doesn't go point by point. He interweaves a lot of ideas. So to me, it's like either it was a little bit lazier to deal with the entire book, instead of like, because it's not like Bernard, you can go point 1, point 2, point 3, right?
It's very analytical to the cuff.
Right. Whereas Norris is, he's interweaving different ideas, and instead of reading the holistic of the entire chapter, maybe he did read it, but dealing with the entire chapter in his book, he just left it at Bernard's initial statements and did not actually deal with Bernard's answer to that. And with that, he spends most of the chapter trying to prove dia and and like these different Greek prepositions as having to mean some kind of agency. And he goes, I proved agency. It's the end. I win, right?
We got him.
Presupposes the type of agency, though. Yeah, I know. We got it. And I think, and you're right, Chris. He presupposes a lot of ideas, and he kind of just makes statements. Really, the Greek obviously means this, so it's there. It's done. But he doesn't, and this is why I think this is what separates to me more of overall genuine apologetic, or more so apologetic versus genuine scholarship. You have people like Dunn, right? I know some consider him a sloppy scholar, but he's not. I don't think so.
I think he's pretty good.
Dunn, right? Dunn will deal with all the data that he can have present. He'll deal with like you were talking about, Chris. The 1,000th time Paul mentions this, and then maybe the different forms of agency and the squishiness of Paul's statements, and how you can take it this way, but then when we look at Paul here, he's taking it this way, and then you could also take it this way. So which way most fits within the immediate context, the external context of the holistic understanding of Paul's the Pauline corpus? What better fits the historical aspect? I don't mean, when I say historical, I don't mean how the church has historically known it. What I mean is Paul being within his worldview, and what likely would Paul have meant by those words within the surrounding worldview of Paul's time, right? And I think when you take all this into account, which BURGOS does not, he states the the genitive, or other Greek prepositions, like I was saying, and kind of puts a baseline meaning on there, maybe throws a source out there, and then he's done. He presupposes that this must be right. He doesn't actually deal with every possible answer. I think, Chris, this is the crux of probably your critique more than anyone's, because this is what you love to do. He does not deal with every possible answer. He builds one little argument up. He tears it down as garbage. He puffs his chest up as better, and then he ends. And that's probably why you can go over so many verses in one book. And here we are over one context having a 2 hour and 30-minute conversation about it.
Oh
But
yeah, and
and he's over 4 pages because we're trying to deal with more possibilities than he ever even touched.
exactly right, and that's the most important most important thing people need to understand. You and I don't mean to be negative, but sometimes simplicity is not the answer. Because what you do is, if you're too simple, you're not understanding the complexity of how things work together. Because that's why, I always talk about spectrums, right? Oneness tend toward the gravity is toward one end of the spectrum, right? If there's one God and Jesus is God, well, obviously, the most simplest form is Jesus a theophany or flesh suit, right? That's the most simplest thing. But when you read the text, it's more complex than that. And it's complex only because the first question you must ask, what is God's intent? And what is the resulting value and qualities of that intent? If that intent is to be true man, then you have to accept all the qualities of true man. That means he has a God. He prays, he hungers, he thirsts, he has a relationship to God. These are all necessary qualities that are essential. It doesn't make two gods. It makes God manifested as true man. That's why when we talk about how Jesus is God, it's not an ontological demand. Like Unitarians will bring up, well, Jesus, he didn't know this or that. We're not making ontological claims about the man in a divine sense. We're making that Jesus is God manifested in flesh, the exact representation, the full expression, all the fullness of the Godhead dwelled in him bodily. But it's still true man, true relationship, true human concepts and capacity. Jesus is God by first decree or intent. God's decree intent to exist as X, that is not himself, in a specific way. By expression, he's God. He's the Word made flesh. He's out of the Holy Spirit. That means he is what? By source of origin and source of being, he is God. The ultimate reality of this expression, this decree, is true man, a true son of God and a true son of man. It's not an either or, it's both. There's true man there. There's a true son of David. So when you don't see, and that's the reason why I say, well, is Jesus the Father? That is way too simple, because if you're just saying is an equal aspect, no. That's the reason why when I teach on oneness and I bring up to people, that makes them kind of go, huh? As I asked, is Jesus the Father? I bring up a slide that says yes. And then I bring up a slide that says no. Why? Because it's two different aspects of what do you mean by is Jesus the Father? Because the point of being the Father is not a one-to-one correlating aspect. It's Jesus is the expression of God to be true man and to redeem. Therefore, Jesus is Father by intent and identity to express, but the realization is this man knows himself according to his existence as a son of God, son of man. God's intent. He knows himself as the Word of God to redeem mankind. He prays, he hungers, he thirsts. He has all these true realities as true man. That's how he knows himself. He doesn't know himself from a divine existence. Otherwise, you collapse the natures. You collapse the existence. If you do that, now you're an Apollinarian. You're a flesh suiter.
Yeah.
You're a monothelite, whatever you want to go. But I wanted to bring up something real quick. And this is to the text of Colossians. I want everyone to understand. There we go. Much better. We didn't get into this yet on Colossians 1:18. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. Wait a minute. He's beginning. Oh, that's Genesis, guys. There it is. Beginning. Everyone, he's the beginning. See how we can do that with any type of term? Right? The firstborn from the dead. So he might come to have first place in everything. Right? For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. And now, who is God here? Who's God? For in him all the fullness of the Father was pleased to dwell. How do we know? And through him, God was pleased to reconcile to himself, wait a minute, all things. Through whom? Is this the man or is this the eternal? Right? What's the means here? Is it the incarnational acts in reality? Whether on earth or where? In heaven. By making peace through the blood of his cross. And you were once estranged and hostile in your mind, doing evil deeds. He has now reconciled in his fleshly body through death, so as to present you holy and blameless and unreproachable before him. Wait a minute. Is it them or him? Provided you continue securely established, steadfast in the faith. But I imagine BURGOS doesn't like that. Well, maybe he does as a Calvinist, but I guess that maybe don't have free will. But that's all I think. But the point is that just in the context, the all things here is contextually tied to heaven and earth, not just simply earth, right? The body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might have first place or preeminence in everything. So this is a very important text, especially when you get into Ephesians and you go through Ephesians, the context of that. It's amazing how when you start reading Paul and the terminology, it's not about Genesis. It's just simply not. There's no reason to demand Genesis. Now, like I said, could it be? Could it be within view of all things in the sense of God's wisdom, his foreknowledge, his plan, his all those things? Yes, it could be. Not, I don't argue that.
It's not the main focus.
Exactly. And so when we start,
and it's not improved personal agency.
Yeah,
like
and
within creation.
Yeah, definitely not in creation, because we definitely can establish that there's agency just simply in redemption. In that sense. So it doesn't demand Genesis at all. Because when we go to like Ephesians 3:9, and to bring forth light for everyone, what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God, who created all things? Who's that? The Father. The Father created all things. So that through the church, versus Ephesians 3:10, the manifold wisdom of God might what? Now be made known to the rulers and authorities in heavenly places.
Yeah.
Where are you going to go? This was according to the eternal purpose that he realized in Christ Jesus, our Lord. Now, I can go two ways here because both are true. Literally in Ephesians 3:9 and 3 through 3:11, I can literally argue both aspects. Eternal purpose, God's plan, his wisdom, all through the redeeming act of authorities that have been brought about in Christ. by means of the church, in whom we have boldness and access with confidence through our faith in him. So verse 3:14, for this reason, I bow my knees before the Father. Before the Father. Wait a minute. Again, if it's to the glory of the Father, why is it that ultimately here, where's the Holy Spirit, folks? From whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you to be strengthened with the power through his Spirit in your inner beings. Is that the Father's Spirit? Yes. So that Christ, wait a minute, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. Now, you go to first, John 14. We can go all through all that. We'd love to do that. We definitely will through Burgos's book. Can't wait for that. But when you get down through it, Ephesians is one of probably the most devastating books when it comes to arguing and pointing out the economy of God and the creation of the church. It's devastating because it's all about the Father through the man Jesus Christ. And notice, Paul doesn't make qualifications here. Well, we're not talking about I'll give you for example, 1 Corinthians 15. Wait a minute. How's the eternal Son being subjected back unto the Father? Well, if he's eternal, notice Paul doesn't ever make qualifications about these authorities and powers. He doesn't say, wait a minute, the eternal Son still got all power. He's still transcendent in God, but the human nature is over here. How does that work? Does Paul even think about these correlating problems of a divine nature and a human nature? No. Because Paul's not thinking about divine and human nature. He's thinking about true man and true God. And Jesus is the manifestation and expression of that one true God as true man, a redeeming Messiah, and all that fun stuff. But nowhere does Paul make qualifications. Oh, wait a minute. We're talking about divine person here, but then there's this smitten dude that has faith and cries and weeps and in the days of his flesh. No, he doesn't make those type of qualifications.
Yeah. Well,
but I know we are going on 2 hours and 43 minutes. But guys, I'm sorry, I have at least 25 more pages of points I want to bring up, literally on Colossians. But that's going to be for
pick them up and start from there because I don't think any of them should be
part two.
Yeah, we could definitely do a part two because there's a lot to still cover on his failures on image, his arguments against. I mean, there's so much we could do. I think we definitely can discuss that, and and obviously we're definitely looking for Hebrews. That's definitely a big one as well.
Yeah.
That's the bread and butter in debates.
And I think, we can definitely try to pick up where we left off on Colossians. We don't have to end Colossians here tonight. We can definitely pick it up next.
Yeah,
next time.
I think we definitely could pick up on Colossians again, and then start with Hebrews, and maybe make an episode and a half out of it too. And one, because Hebrews will definitely be a long discussion as well. There's a lot to Hebrews 1.
Yeah. I think a lot of these other these one verse hits, I think we could probably knock out like a handful in one video. Some are going to be a little bit longer than others, obviously, but
yes, definitely.
Him dealing with a whole hymn compared to one verse where he's just kind of like proof texting, or
exactly
him coming after our quote unquote proof text per se. We can definitely hit those like 20 minutes per one, maybe 10 to 20.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that'll be fairly short. Yeah, John 17:5 will
Yeah.
definitely be a long one, and many others. But
That's my favorite.
Of course.
Wow, one of my favorite ones, metaphysically.
I can't wait for that one too.
Yeah.
There's so much to be said in such little time.
Yeah.
I think this is why the early Trinitarians, when it came to a lot of theorizing, they just didn't do that. They saw the problems. They left a lot of stuff. Maybe we say a cop out to mystery, but maybe it was more wisdom on their part. They could see the potential problems.
Definitely. Yes, and that's one of the big things. I'll be honest with you. There's no reason to. There's too many other options that are very viable to interpret Colossians 1 through, than to simply say it demands it. That's just wow. That's contextually lazy. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but there's no way. I mean, if you have a good argument, I have no problem with it. But to just simply say it demands this interpretation, wow.
Right. He's not just offering a possible interpretation and saying this is why I think it's the best. He's going, no, the text demands my position. Every other position, almost like every other position, is silly to him, And I think that is where it kind of, in some ways, makes him his initial read, where he seemed a little bit more academic at times. It takes a hit on that academic persona.
Definitely so.
But anyways.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for tonight, everyone. Brother Nero, Tim, I thank you all again for coming on, and appreciate y'all and everything you do. Love y'all, and everyone who joined, I thank you very much for joining us. We truly appreciate you and listening to what we have. Follow us again. Obviously, go to Follow the Cloud and Brother Nero's page and the content they have. So thank y'all for very much. I pray that God blesses you and gives y'all strength in everything you do and provide you the wisdom of God. Thank y'all.
Amen.